Welcome back to another episode of Profitable Publishing the Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about why your social media posts aren't attracting your readers and what you can do about it. I'm Ashley, I'm your host, and I am here to support you to be able to package your expertise into a profitable book. And so, if you're a coach, consultant, speaker, service provider who knows that you have something you want to share with your audience to be able to help them get a transformation, then this is the place for you. So, let's talk about why some of your social media posts just completely flop and others take off that you may not have even thought would even have that effect. So I got inspired to do this episode by looking at posts on Threads and also across the different platforms, and even people who've reached out to me to know, okay, I have this book, I'm trying to promote it. What can I do to basically get my book out there? Just this week, an author named Kelly posted that she shares about her book and she gets crickets, and then she shared about eating salad and getting sick, and it got 20,000 views. And so her post was just like, make it make sense. How is this even the case? Just giving context. Now, in this season in the US, there is an outbreak of a parasite that is affecting lettuce. And so that has to do with why that post took off. But we see this time and time again. I've seen authors say, okay, well, I post about my cat and that gets a bazillion views. And then people are commenting and engaged. And then I post about my book and then nobody comments, nobody likes, or it's just my mom or just whoever. Which shout out to the moms out there who are supporting their kids with their dreams of being an author and being successful. Why is that the case? Why is it that when you post about something like your cat, your car, whatever, that has nothing to do with your book, and people are running and tripping over themselves to be able to comment on that post versus when you talk about your book, you really don't have that same traction. And so there are a couple reasons for that. One, when you really think about it, more people are likely going to relate to the thing that is more common that you're just speaking about than your book. And I don't say that to say that your book is not something that's relatable. However, there's a wider audience of people that can relate to that. So for example, with the parasite that I mentioned, there are more people who are on high alert, who are not trying to get sick, who are trying to see, okay, who are the distributors that I could buy produce from or buy lettuce from. And it's just something that there's already traction there and people are already looking for it. And so if you post about that, it's kind of like you're riding the wave of something that's already in existence. Same thing with your cat. If you have a cat, if you have a dog, whatever the case may be, there's a larger pool of people who have a pet or who have a dog or a cat, or in that case, who have kids, because sometimes kids and animals can do some of the same silly things. Then you have opened up your audience to a wider range of people who would be more likely to comment. And so that could be a good thing. However, if that has nothing to do with your book, when you are doing your posts, I want you to keep in mind these 5 things I'm going to tell you, because these are actually likely blocking people from either seeing your post, besides the algorithm, because we know the algorithm is doing whatever it wants to do on whatever platforms. But these are going to be 5 things that you want to consider that could be hindering your progress on social media. And then I'm going to give you some additional things that you can do to be able to be successful on your platform of choice to be able to support your book's marketing efforts. And so before I do that, I want to remind you of a few episodes that you can listen to that will also help you with this. And so episode 3 will help you to decide, is social media even the best marketing platform for you? Because it doesn't have to be one that you use for your book, or it doesn't have to be one that you spend all of your time and energy pouring yourself into if that's just not your vibe, and or if you have a book that actually fits better with other platforms. So that episode will help you to figure out which platform to pick, as well as if it's even a good strategy for you to use for your book. And then episode 22 focuses on 5 books that you should read to be able to treat your book like a business. So let's get into the things that are probably blocking your views, your sales, and your engagement. And then we'll talk about ways in which to fix those things. So the first one is choosing the wrong platform. Now, I say this with a grain of salt because people are on multiple platforms. I have accounts on pretty much all social media platforms. Even if I wasn't a business owner, I still would probably have platforms on all social media platforms. I'm a millennial, so I'm very much into being online and the online space. And so it's just normal to have multiple accounts. And if there's a new platform, I'm likely to sign up more so from the marketing side of things, but if I were not in business, I still would probably sign up just to see what it was about, even if I'm not spending time there. And so take this with a grain of salt. But there are certain platforms that are better suited for different types of people and different types of books. And so people also tend to show up differently on these different platforms. And if you are solely focused on one platform and that's not really where your audience is, or really where your audience puts time, then that can really hinder your progress, because then it's kind of like you're shouting into this tunnel that ends nowhere. It's like a one-sided tunnel where it's just like a brick wall because your people are not there to receive that information. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you are choosing a platform that you just absolutely hate, or you absolutely are like, I cannot stand this, I do not want to be on this platform, I'm only here because somebody told me my audience was here, that's going to show up in your marketing. That's going to show up in your content. People can tell when you are desperate. People can tell when you are just like not really into it. And so if you are using a platform that you just completely despise, I would suggest that you reevaluate that and see if that's really the best choice for you. Because in general, if your book is something that is helping people get a transformation, you're helping people to get a result, you are likely going to be similar to your person, or someone who is not too far removed from who they currently are. So you typically are going to want to be in the same spaces and in the same areas as your person in terms of social media platforms, because you enjoy that kind of medium, or the ways in which that you would communicate on that. And so you don't want to come off forced, and you don't want to come off as like, I'm just here to make money, which obviously that is your goal at the end of the day, as well as to help people with their result or transformation. But you want to make it so that it just feels natural and it's something you can comfortably show up on a daily basis, a weekly, multi days throughout the week basis, whatever the case may be. So once again, you can find almost everybody on all platforms. Some of these platforms have billions of people in them, so there's definitely a wide range of individuals. However, picking a platform that's best suited for you and your book is key. And so keeping that in mind. So for example, I am celebrating my 20th high school anniversary reunion, and I'm on the committee for planning it. And so we were talking about different marketing efforts. And so one thing that the team and I, the committee members and I, noted is that some people are on platforms without actually having a presence there. So they have an account, but they're not necessarily spending time on that platform. And so that's something else you could encounter as well. And so it might mean that you need to either find a platform that they're currently spending time on, even though they have an account on a previous platform, or maybe reaching out to them individually, or reaching out to them in a way that will invite them to have some type of experience with you. So you are not just relying on if the algorithm decides to show these folks your stuff. You are actually putting some effort in from your end of things. Now, the next thing that is probably hindering your progress on social media is that your post is relatable, but it's not necessarily that you being an author is relatable to your audience. Now, I have a slightly different perspective or a slightly different experience, because I write books for authors and I write books for not authors. And so when I write books for authors, I can say certain things, I can use certain content to relate to being an author because I have that as an experience. My buyers are authors. Your buyers are likely not authors. And so that means that the post that you're creating, if you're spending your time making posts about complaining about formatting, or complaining about XYZ, or really just complaining in general, honestly, that can really hinder your growth and your sales. But if you're spending your time focusing on the author journey, and it's strictly on that, as opposed to also incorporating what you're actually writing about, then your algorithm can be curated to attract other authors. And unless those people are your clients, then you're not necessarily going to want to do that on a larger scale. Of course, you want to build community with other authors and have that. But if your goal on social media is to sell to people who are going to buy your book, unless your book is specifically for authors, then you want to be mindful of the things you're posting, the things you're engaging with, and the things you're commenting on. Because specifically on certain platforms, especially like Threads and TikTok, you are curating something that's what's being put on your feed. And it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, okay, I talk about author stuff, and now I'm going to only see author stuff, and then I'm going to be in this little author bubble, as opposed to talking about whatever your book's topic is and the expertise that you're providing inside of that book. And so just being mindful of that. In the same vein, thinking about and realizing that most people are not authors. So I know if you are an author, it's probably something that's consumed you and it's something that you're just like, okay, I have all of these different ideas and all these things I want to do and all these things I want to accomplish, all these books I want to write. But most people in the world are not authors. And so it's easy to assume or easy to think that that's kind of the bubble that you're that you're existing in, and it's not. And so people are more likely to have these other experiences, and you want to tap into those experiences. For example, the author that I mentioned that inspired this episode, she actually did a good job of connecting her salad, her lettuce post with her book, because there is a reference. I'm not going to say the reference. She's I believe, a romance author, but she referenced the salad in an additional post inside of her thread. And so I let her know, like, hey, that was a good way to connect it because it was something that tied to her book. So if you're going to do those kind of things, you do want to bring it back to your book and bring it back to the point of why people are there, because that's really the goal. Because you also want to be mindful that you don't want to become known for something that isn't tied to your expertise. And I say this with, once again, a grain of salt. You don't want to be known for something that's not tied to your expertise, because then you're going to start to attract those people. Now, if you are someone who's like, I am the niche, I don't believe that for people who are just starting out, or for authors who are trying to focus on getting people to sign up for services or packages, unless you're a life coach or something like that. And so you have to be very mindful and very intentional about the content you're posting and what you're consuming. So I know I said that before, but I wanted to hammer that home again. All right, the next thing that could be hindering your progress on social media is that you're posting and ghosting, or you're not engaging with your audience. And so this is honestly one of the easiest ways to get the algorithm to pay attention to you and to get people to understand that you actually are a real person and not a bot. And so it really pains me when I see authors who put up posts and then they are not commenting back to people who are in their comments. Like, these are people who are saying, like, hey, I'm interested. And so you want to make sure you're writing back to them, even if it's just like a thank you for commenting, thank you for posting, even if it's something that's not super personalized. I'm not saying you necessarily have to write a paragraph for each person. However, the more involved you are in your comments, the more the algorithm knows, okay, they really engage with their people, and also it helps other people to be attracted to your stuff. And so don't forget that social media is social. The point of social media is to be social. And I know we think, okay, the point of my social media is to sell my books. And you can do that, but you want to do it in a social way. You want to do it in the way that people understand, like, hey, this person really cares about me, or they really appreciate me buying their book, or being a fan, or even just following or engaging with my comments. So just being very gracious and welcoming to folks who are coming into your little side of the internet to experience you. So commenting on those posts back, responding back to those people, and really being sure to show that you are a human is so important. And so I know when we get into scheduling posts and things like that, it can be easy to just feel like, okay, I can set it and forget it. But you do still want to go and engage, because it also shows the algorithm that you are going to be consistent, and also that you, once again, are not a bot. So, all right, the next one is that your posts are repetitive and they lack structure. So all the time, like literally all the time, I see people, especially in their pre-order and their launch period, authors who say, okay, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. And that's the only post that they're sharing within that time period of like, oh, I gotta make sales. So every post I'm gonna do multiple times a day is gonna say, buy my book. And you do want people to buy your book, but if that's all you post, then people are going to be bored with that. They're going to be like turned off with it. And then also the people who have already bought your book are going to be like, okay, well, I've already bought the book. So like, what's my next step? You want to think beyond that. You want to think outside of that. But if the consistent message is just buy this, buy this, buy this, that's going to turn you off. And so think about the things that you should post, which I'll tell you in just a bit. Thinking about the things you should post, understanding that it shouldn't just be buy my book posts is really going to help you to go a lot farther, and also to, once again, spread out your information across the interwebs. And then when it comes to lacking structure, not having a system for your posts is definitely hindering you, because then every time you go to post, it's more complicated because you have to figure out what you're going to post. It is something where you are trying to think about what to include, and it just slows down the process, which typically is going to make you post less. And so having a system, having some set types of posts that you should share is helpful, and can really make it so that you are understanding, or so that people are able to understand what it is that you're saying, because you have a formulaic pattern to your post. And so These strategies are things that I teach inside of my book, Profitable Publishing Pre-Orders. And so that specifically focuses on how to create your own advance, how to attract your audience, and to pre-sell your book before it's out. And so if that's something you're interested in grabbing, then you can visit preorderprofits.com/book and see those strategies. I share them in chapter 5 of that book, but I'm going to give you a sneak peek here. However, I do a deep dive there. All right. Then the last thing that is hindering your progress is not treating your book like a business. And so I do a breakdown of this in episodes 2 and 22 of the podcast, which I didn't even plan it like that, but it just worked out. I do encourage you to listen to that. When you are working as an author, when you're trying to build your author brand and you're trying to also build that alongside your business, it's important to be consistent, and it's important to have a certain cadence that your readers and people who buy your services, that they can predict, so they know that they can trust you. Like when people come to my page, they know she's going to be talking about pre-orders, book launches, and self-publishing. Like those are the things I'm going to talk about. Of course, I'm going to include details about my personal life and my family to show that I'm a human, and because I have things outside of that I do. However, people know that I'm probably not going to be talking about underwater basket weaving unless it's for a client who's doing underwater basket weaving, and then now I'm going to talk to you about their experience. And so it still ties back to what I want to be known for and what people would expect to see from me. And so keeping that in mind and really being intentional about the things that you post, because the more that you post, the more that people start to remember you for something. And so I remember about 2 years ago at this point, I did a post and I had a stack of sticky notes from my next book. And I didn't show what was on the sticky notes, but I just had it where I said, okay, writing my next book, drop in the comments what you think it will be about. And the most random comments I got, like it was literally from so many different areas. Some of them are applicable, some of them were completely random. And I'm like, I've never talked to you about that, so I don't know why you said that. But that told me, like, hey, I need to adjust how people see me. And so one of the best ways to do that is to publish a book that packages my expertise, is to consistently talk about that thing. And your book is really just something that includes different nuggets or different things that you have basically put into your framework. And it's the launchpad that you can use for your social media content. You can literally choose different quotes from your book and share those on a consistent basis, but then also expounding upon them and adding different details that people can take away with them and structures that they can use. And so the last part of treating your book like a business that I'm going to mention here is that it's important to look at your analytics and see what's working. So I know in the author that I mentioned, she gave the number of views that were on that post about lettuce. And so that tells me she was looking at her insights. She was getting those details. It's important to look at your analytics, look at your insights, and see what's working and see what you need to adjust and what you need to change. All right, so now we're going to talk about what to share instead so that you do get some traction on your posts. Now, of course, this is not necessarily a guarantee. It's not a guarantee because obviously every case is different. However, typically when I see either my own clients or other authors that I'm looking at, these are some of the things that they're including for their nonfiction books. And so they are giving insights or strategies. They're not just listing hypotheticals. They're sharing specific stories of people that they've worked with. They're doing case studies. And so that could look like video case studies, or it could look like written case studies where they're sharing, okay, before this person worked with me, they were experiencing this, this, and this. And then we implemented XYZ in their process. And now on the end of that, now they are having X, Y, Z over here. They're having this experience. And so doing that helps people to be able to see, okay, well, that worked for them, so that can maybe work for me. Or they have a business that's similar to mine, and so I like that idea and I think I want to implement that. And it also gives people a chance to see what it's like to work with you, because they could reach out to that person. They could just see how you're describing what the actual structure was together. And it gives some flexibility besides just saying, I worked with this person and we got these results. It was, here's the play-by-play, here's the details, here's the insight. That is something that is a little bit further and deeper. And if you can do this interview style, that's great too. And then including your framework and your structure, because this lets people know that you have a process and that you know what you're doing and that you have taken the time to sit down and actually work with either somebody to capture that process, or to make it so that you are using it in your own way. And so that's so important, so key. And so it shows people, okay, they know how to get me from point A to point C, or even point, and I say C because there's multiple steps, but or even point M, depending upon what your structure is. And so that is so important and so key because it helps you to stand out, but also it helps to really elevate your authority because people can see, okay, they're not just pulling things out of where. They're not just pulling things out of where. They actually have taken the time to actually do these steps. And if you have those case studies with it, then, oh, I see where they implemented part 2 and I see where they implemented part 5, and now I can process and understand that better. And so with this, I shared a similar experience with my my book, Profitable Publishing with Pre-Orders. When I was writing the book, I hosted a group coaching program. And so part of the group coaching program is that people received access to a private podcast. And on that private podcast, it was a case study of my book launch. And so it was a very meta experience of like, okay, I'm writing the book, I'm hosting a group program, and I'm also giving an inside look as if someone was a fly on the wall during this process. And so that was helpful to the attendees because they got to see the inner workings, they got to see the things that were decisions that were made, the rationale, things like that. And so that also showed my framework for being able to host pre-orders that pay for my book because I was able to use I was able to use the income from that program to be able to cover my publishing costs. And so it just made it something that bolstered my authority even more because I was doing the thing that I tell other people to do in real time. It wasn't something where I just said, okay, this works, try it out. Like I've done it and I did it continuously in real time and also continue to do it after that. And so it really was helpful in that way. I do from time to time get a few fiction authors here. So if you're a fiction author, then you are going to want to do things slightly different. You can still have the same effects. And so you could drop somebody off in the middle of your story if you're posting about it. You could also act as if the stories are real. I've seen this a couple times and it's very compelling. And also people get really into it and they're like, oh, I need to find out how this ends. And it's kind of like a preview, but basically because people are nosy and or curious, let me say curious, people are curious, they are more likely to either follow you or to get more details on the topic or get more details on the text. And so dropping people off in the middle of the story helps them get right into the action. And then acting like they're real helps them to really tap into that curiosity aspect that people have. And so if these are strategies that you want to try out to elevate your social media, then I encourage you to grab a copy of my book, Profitable Publishing with Pre-Orders, and it's available on my site at preorderprofits.com as well as major retailers. All right, so in this episode, we talked about why your social media may not be attracting your audience. And then we also talked about strategies to be able to turn that around and to make it so that they are coming to you as opposed to you wondering, why is everybody looking at my cat post and not even concerned about my book post? So hopefully this has been helpful. Until next time, stay profitable.